Okay. I think, can everyone hear me at this point? Just put a
Yes.
thumbs
Yes.
up if you hear me. Okay, sorry about that. It'll be the time we usually start.
Put it on my laptop.
Okay.
No, it's not full.
Thank you all for coming. Erev Christmas. It's funny,
Erev Christmas.
usually we actually feel Christmas a little bit.
Mark, can you mute Brownstein and the others, please?
Okay, I'm gonna mute everybody again. Hopefully I won't be muting myself again, so hold on a second.
Oh, Catherine or Caitlin, sorry.
Throwing balls in from halfway between the 3-point line.
Okay, muting
Yeah, I'm
everybody.
turning it off.
Mute all current new participants, mute all. Okay, am I still? No, I probably muted myself also, probably. Okay, can people still hear me? Thumbs up if you hear me. Okay, good. Okay, so this Christmas,
We still hear Brownstein.
Harvey, can you mute yourself somehow?
We don't care about football.
Wow. Just
Okay,
He's on twice. He's on twice, I think. I think he's on with his phone and with his computer.
okay. Harvey claims to have muted from the beginning, so, okay. Okay, let's do our best here. Like I was starting to say, usually in Israel, despite the fact that Christmas isn't exactly a Jewish holiday, there is some sense of
I
Christmas.
hear you.
Do people not hear me?
yeah.
Does people hear me?
Kind of. We
Okay.
hear a
Okay,
woman
fine.
and a guy talking about football.
Okay. Okay. So despite the fact that it's not a Jewish holiday, there's usually some sense of Christmas in some form or other. Tourists are here, no tourists in the country at the moment whatsoever. In Jaffa, where I go frequently, as of last Wednesday, when I was last there, no, I guess it was Wednesday, there was no Christmas tree in the middle of Jaffa by the clock tower. Going back to I-24 News tonight at 10, I'll double check that it's still not there. But every year that's a big deal, and there's a lot of traffic and people slowly going around the tree. This year, none of that. Today's a really bad day here, a very sad day. Altogether, they announced 9 additional casualties from over Shabbat, together with the ones from yesterday. We're talking about 15 soldiers who died just over this past weekend, the past Shabbat. Which is probably the largest number that we've had in a short period of time. It's not getting any better, let's put it that way. Some of them died in the second time that a Namir, that's one of Israel's APC's carriers, one of the personnel carriers, that it's well armored and has anti-missile missiles, was hit again.
Mr. Harvey, please shut up.
This is the second time that one of these have been hit by RPGs and successfully killed quite a number of soldiers. But the others were all sorts of places, both guerrilla-style attacks, going into buildings that were booby-trapped, many different ways. Plus, in addition, one soldier was killed on Friday on the Lebanese border when a rocket hit the place he was located in, and he died as well. And the number of seriously injured keeps on growing. There are probably over 2,000 soldiers who have been injured so far in the war, and that number is growing. So the mood is quite somber. There's no other way around it. There's beginning to be the normal questions that occur. Are we making the right, does the army know what it's doing? Are we making the right choices? All of those sort of questions that come up. The biggest question remains and continues to remain that everyone agrees, the fact that we have no plan, no political plan for what happens afterwards is the biggest single problem. It's very, as I've written before, Clausewitz says you can, that war is an extension of politics by any other means. And in a sense it is. You're trying to create a new political reality by using kinetic power, by using war. but we don't know what political reality we're trying to get to, or at least the government certainly doesn't. Actually, I don't know anyone who does, to be honest with you. What exact political, what's the political goals here? Without clear political goals, it's really very difficult to define your military goals. It's very nice to define elimination of Hamas as a military and governmental group. Is it doable? It's really hard to say at this point. You know, sometimes I wrote one time 2 weeks ago, listening to every evening at around 8:30 or so, the Army spokesman gives his briefing on the events of the day. And I remember when, unfortunately, my gray hair gives it the fact that I was old enough to know about it, that once upon a time there was something called the 5 o'clock follies. And if any of you are old enough to remember what the 5 o'clock follies were, those were in Vietnam every afternoon at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The military spokesman would announce how many Viet Cong we killed this day and how many this and that. And that would be the 5 o'clock follies. Every day we were doing better than the day before. And of course, we all know how that ended. So that's a concern. There's also a concern that the Hezbollah is moving more and more towards a guerrilla warfare. And that's another issue. We went through that in Lebanon. It's difficult. So it's one thing to conquer areas. There's nothing that can stop the IDF from conquering ground. There's nothing they haven't that can stop the tank corps and everybody else. And no one can even stop the ground troops from moving forward. However, you know, we announced that the northern part of Gaza, including Jabalia, was at this point under control. And then, of course, they come out from a tunnel that we didn't know about and kill some soldiers. The reality is, as someone said today, the army underestimated the number of tunnels that are in Gaza, which again is another one of those many intelligence failures that go into the events that we've been living through. There are those who are making political comments. So Itamar Ben-Gvir today stated that the reason so many soldiers are dying is because of the first hostage exchange and the ceasefire that we gave to the Hamas. There's probably a little bit of truth in that. There's no question that ceasefire aided him in preparing. On the other hand, we got back almost all the women and children, and not all of them, but an awful lot of them. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. As much as it's terrible, they're still holding elderly men and regular men and women soldiers if they're still alive, which we do not know if any of them are still alive. But that's bad enough. But they were holding women and, you know, civilian women and children, and that was really getting to the heart of the country in a very big way. So I don't think that's, you know, the army knew that they would gain something from a ceasefire. Of course, you know, I personally question why we telegraph our moves, but that's a different story. You know, the need to tell the civilians to move from neighborhood to neighborhood is a wonderful plan for the Hamas to know exactly where we're going. Now, I understand why we're doing it on one hand. On the other hand, it's very problematic. And we don't seem to be able to surprise them, except, you know, a quick movement to Khan Yunis. But they knew we were coming to Khan Yunis. It was just a question of whether we got there faster than they thought. And meantime, we have 4 army corps, what's called Ugudot in Israel, which is the largest Israeli army unit. It's called an Ugda. The American equivalent is division, but it's really not in the same sense because, like I said, America has corps, which, you know, like the Third Army and the First Army. In terms of, if you think of World War II, there was the Third Army and the First Army in Europe, and a couple of different armies in different places. In our case, an Ugda is the equivalent, even though it's a smaller, you know, it's smaller. We're nothing like the size of the U.S. Army that invaded Europe. So it's our largest military units, and we have 4 of them in Gaza right now. And, you know, that's part of the reason sometimes we have there are accidents, because there's so many people fighting at the same time, many of whom have never fought together before. And so that creates situations where a significant number of the casualties have been self-inflicted, have been soldier on soldier by accident, what's called in Hebrew dutz stadi or dutz, which is bad, but it's friendly fire happens unfortunately in every army and in every war. But anyway, that's part of the reason. And part of the reason, of course, is it's very intense urban warfare. And, in the end, there's this overall problem we have of balancing civilian deaths with army deaths. That's a very difficult way to try to balance it, obviously. Every mother in Israel will basically tell you, I don't really care. Take down all the buildings, don't endanger my son or husband or whatever it might be, or my wife. At this point, they're women soldiers in Gaza too. But we live in a world where that's, first of all, not morally possible, and B, politically, it's a very big problem. The way we fought the war generally has been a challenge, because the nature of how we're fighting it, our humongous advantage is the firepower that we have, the ability to direct large amounts of firepower, is something that is our advantage. But of course, firepower brings with it other, collateral damages, as they say. The other thing that seems to have happened on the negative side is we thought the Air Force would be more successful in attacking the underground tunnels, and that does not seem to be the case. The only way to get rid of a tunnel seems to be to get to a tunnel. When you get to a tunnel, the tunnels are, so many of them are booby-trapped. So many of them have surprises. We're fighting in some of the tunnels, from what I understand, but it's a challenge. We prepared to fight, the tunnels that they thought that they were going to bring into Israel, the ones that were being built before we built the underground wall. We were ready to fight in those tunnels. I don't think we have an army that's trained to fight in large-scale numbers of these big, large tunnels that Hamas has. It's another type of warfare. It's not a type of warfare that anyone really has a lot of experience in. And it's dangerous. I mean, once again, going back to Vietnam, if anyone remembers the term tunnel rats, those were American soldiers who literally fought in the tunnels. A terrible job they had, and they didn't have a very long longevity, let's put it that way. An awful lot of American GIs died in the tunnels of Vietnam. So it's all challenging, let's put it that way. And then we'll turn for a second to the north, because there's our second huge challenge. We've been fighting a low-intensity warfare now with Hezbollah for almost the whole war. Low intensity in the sense that they limit their attacks to within a few miles of our border. We limit our attacks mostly to within a few, maybe a few more miles of their border. And that goes on, and every single day, there are missile attacks and the rocket attacks, people die. A fair number of soldiers have died there, as well as a number of civilians. And of course, basically, the north of Israel is no longer inhabited up to a certain level. The cities along the immediate border are empty. My son-in-law's family comes from Shlomi. They've been living in a hotel for the last 70-odd days. One of his sisters lives, on the other hand, in Ma'alot, which is like 6 kilometers from the border, so they weren't moved out. Except every time you look at the attacks, every once in a while, there's a rocket attack on Ma'alot. But throughout the northern border, we've moved almost 100,000 people away from the border, and they're living in hotels. And that's now for 79 days, and there's no clear plan of how to get them back. There is hope. And I'll put the word hope, because I hope it's more than that. But there is hope that there could be a political solution to the north, being that we give Hezbollah what they've wanted for the longest time, some changes along the border, a question of a couple of places along the border that they claim belongs to them. It's complicated because it was actually Syrian, and the residents of one of the places don't want to go be part of Lebanon. But leaving all that part aside, it would make no strategic importance to Israel. And we could give those back in return for Hezbollah moving back beyond the Litani River, which is where they were supposed to be based on the UN resolution. Of course, you listen to some of the people, the residents of the north, and they say, well, that's very nice, but what's to stop them from moving back when they just feel like it? It's not all that far away. They could just move back and come back. So therein lies the problem. There are those people who are calling for expanding the war, including an all-out war with Hezbollah. We had the report in the Wall Street Journal I guess it was yesterday, that talked about the fact that Biden had convinced Netanyahu on the fourth day of the war not to launch a preemptive strike on Lebanon. It was a preemptive strike that he didn't really want. Gallant wanted it, and the chief of staff wanted it. The new members at that point was when Gantz and Eisenkot joined the war cabinet. They were opposed. I think Biden and Netanyahu and everyone was right at that particular point. We're having enough trouble just in Gaza. I don't think we needed a two-front war at the same time. On top of which, and I think I've said this before, if we're going to go to war with Lebanon, which will include most likely significant missile attacks on Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel with accurate missiles, not missiles as opposed to rockets. The difference between a missile, by the way, and a rocket is dumb. The minute you launch it, it has no ability to find a target or go to a target. Missile, on the other hand, can be GPS aimed, it can be aimed laser aimed, it can be aimed just, it can be controlled from behind. There are ways of stopping that, but that's a different story. But in my opinion, number one, until we rebuild a number of missiles that we used in Gaza, we use an awful lot of missiles stopping the rockets from Gaza. We need to make more of them, so we have a much larger inventory. I have no idea what the ability of the Rafael, who makes the missile, is to produce them, but we need to make a lot more missiles to be ready if we're going to go to Lebanon, a war with Lebanon. And two, of course, there's Israel's laser system, which by all accounts will become functional sometime in the beginning of next year. And of course, that makes a big difference also. The lasers are much cheaper, and we don't know how accurate they're going to be or how effective. We'll only see, but they'll increase our ability to defend against missiles tremendously. Because the current plan of the IDF is, if we go to war with Lebanon, is to basically move quickly to the outside of Beirut, where the missiles are located, and unfortunately, that's going to take a lot of troops. And again, it's not clear that we have the troops, but I'm not sure we're ready for that at this point. Let's put it that way. And finally, we get to the Houthis, the new friend that we never knew we had, so to speak. Clearly, they're a proxy, but not an independent proxy, but a proxy just the same of Iran. Yesterday, they attacked an Israeli related, and related is a very loose term, it means an Israeli businessman owns part of the company that ships it. It's all sorts of different ways. It was not a Zim ship, which is the only ships that are theoretically Israeli, but it was an Israeli related ship, was attacked off the coast of India by a drone. Israeli sources say, and American sources actually, that was actually sent from Iran, probably by the Houthis, but from Iran with Iran's cooperation. The attacks on shipping in Bab el-Mandeb, which is the area to the very bottom of the Red Sea, is something that Israel can't allow to continue forever. The world can't allow it, because that basically closes the Suez Canal, in which 25% of world trade goes through. The U.S. has created a task force. Question is, how effective is it going to be? It's very hard to protect every ship. There aren't enough ships in the military ships to protect every ship. Maybe they can start going on convoys. I don't know, but probably without taking offensive actions against the Houthis, it's going to be a very big challenge. And of course, no one really wants to get into war with the Houthis. The Saudis tried for quite a number of years and didn't succeed. Does the United States have the backbone and the willingness to do it? Big question. I doubt it, but on the other hand, there may be no choice. So we'll have to see. Overall, the biggest problem we face is political future. I don't mean internal political. That's a whole other story. But the political future, what are we trying to obtain? What do we think we can what can we get? We had to respond to the events of October 7th. The goal of eliminating Hamas is a very logical goal. But between being a logical goal and the ability to obtain it, are we willing to pay the price in terms of time and life in order to do that? I do not know. It will be long. It's not something that takes place in a 3-month battle. It's something that'll probably take a year, maybe more, if we continue at it. And we're not taking the initiative on the humanitarian area. You know, on one hand, I've listened to some Israeli commentators say, well, listen, our solution is we should not allow any humanitarian aid until our hostages are released. Sounds like a good idea if we're dealing with normal people. But we're not. The terrorists that make up Hamas couldn't care less if all their people starve, all the better for them. As a matter of fact, they've been stealing a good percentage of the food that's been coming in is being stolen by Hamas. I mean, the UN makes some ridiculous statement today that 3/4 of the people who are starving in the world are starving in Gaza. I mean, that's an absurd statement, and I guess the world's in a much better state than I thought it was in terms of people's ability to get food. That's number one. Number two, there are 200 trucks a day bringing food stuff into Gaza, and if they're not being distributed right, I don't know, whose fault that is. Now, we should be doing more, but that's a different story as well. Also, some of the more absurd headlines, the New York Times headline yesterday that more people have been killed in this war than have been killed in the Middle East since 1948. What a ridiculous statement there is. I mean, let's talk about Syria, where somewhere between 300,000 and 600,000 people were killed in that war, and that just ended. It didn't even end. It's still going on right now. We could talk about Sudan, when there is somewhere in the area of 4 million refugees. But of course, ours is the worst there is. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying there aren't unfortunately civilian dead, and maybe we could have done a better job. I'm not really sure. But again, I'm not sure what I would do if I was the chief of staff or the prime minister in terms of how you balance the two. Maybe our intelligence isn't as good as we think, which already seems to be the case to a large extent. So again, political future is number one. We don't have one. Real problem. A military goal, we still have the military goal. We're moving slowly. I mean, we're moving slowly. We're a big, heavy army at this point. And we're not like the moving quick and simultaneously going to Khan Yunis and Rafiah and Philadelphia route and all those things. We're telegraphing our moves far in advance, and we're doing them. And number three, the most disappointing thing of this whole war, besides the casualties, is the fact that we're now 79 days in, about 60 days into the ground defensive, and we only managed to rescue one hostage. That in and of itself is really a disappointment. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, I think every one of us every day gets up hoping to hear good news that we recognize that we rescued some hostages, and all we managed to do was kill a few hostages, which is very depressing to say the least. I hope I haven't depressed everybody too much. It's depressing overall. There's no question about it. But we'll somehow overcome. There are no choices. The famous Israeli song is "Ein li eretz acheret," I have no other land, and that's the reality for everybody here. Well, mostly everybody here. The growth of anti-Semitism all over the world that's taken place at the same time has given pause to those Israelis who were thinking, well, maybe it's time to get out of here. Now the realization is there isn't a better place to be. So we make a stand here, and we will do the best we can. Okay, I think, let's see, time-wise, yep. So I'll open up now for questions. Please put up your hand, as they say, raise your hand. And I see Paul is the first one to have raised his hand, so go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so my question has to do with specifically Gaza, and there were reports in the paper that hundreds of Palestinian or Hamas fighters have been captured. Okay, and I presume that there's a lot of intelligence that could be gathered from them about the tunnels, et cetera. So I'm wondering, it doesn't. We don't get the impression, and certainly we don't get it from you, that we're learning enough from them that's really helpful.
Okay, we're certainly learning a lot from them. There's no question. We're learning a lot from them. We have more intelligence than we had yesterday, and every day we have more and more intelligence. No question. However, it's not enough. When you're starting from a zero, zero is not the right word. We had a lot of intelligence before. Theoretically, Gaza was the most observed part of the earth. We were observing it all the time from the air, from all sorts of ways. We had all sorts of advanced intelligence methods within Gaza. They obviously didn't succeed all that well in the end, but we are getting intelligence all the time. And we even, we may know a lot about the tunnels at this point. However, knowing about them and knowing how to fight in them is two different matters altogether. I mean, we have specific corps of people who are trained to fight or to go into the tunnels, but there really aren't that many of them. One of the biggest problems Israel has right now, in my opinion, is our army is too small. There's just there's no two ways about it. Our army is too small. The number of people we have in the ground forces who are trained ground force personnel are just not enough. And we don't have enough tanks. And, we stopped buying tanks because we thought the age of tank warfare was over. And we don't have enough of a lot of things. The only we have a lot of is planes. And planes are wonderful if you want to fight Iran, and they're wonderful to give support. But, we're using an F-16, an F-15, or even an F-35 to take down a $1,000 drone. Also doesn't make a lot of sense. Firing a Sidewinder, or the Israeli version of the Sidewinder, I forgot what it's called, missile that costs, I don't know, $20,000 at a $1,000 drone. So we're just not, this is asymmetric warfare. And we're good at asymmetric warfare, but just not at this scale, in my opinion. I mean, we're good at it. We're going to succeed. We'll ultimately win this, but we just don't have enough. Amy Lieberman.
Hi, thank you. Number one, just two quick questions, and you can answer them simultaneously. One is, what do you imagine to be the ultimate fate of the hostages, which I ask all the time? And the same one is, is it possible that we're going to move into some sort of all-out something? I mean, this has just been going on for so long, and I'm just wondering, are we expecting an escalation, a de-escalation, a continuance? I don't know.
Okay, so I don't have an answer to the first one. I mean, you can make any scenario you want in your mind. Obviously, they're not all alive. How many of them? There's some of them are clearly alive. We saw the tape from the other day of the three older men. They're still obviously alive. I've been surprised at how few videos Hamas has sent us, which is in some ways worrisome. In other words, I would have thought they would have been using videos to, psychological warfare of the women chayalot, or all sorts of things of that nature, women soldiers. And they haven't, which scares me to the question of if they're even alive. So that's the big question, is how many of them are alive? And we don't have the answer to that question. Look, the Egyptians just proposed today a proposal that had a multi-layered, multi-stage plan, and for the hostages, which was, first there would be a 2-week ceasefire in which they would release the 40 older men, and we give up, maybe 10 Palestinian prisoners. But the stage 3 was basically, we would end the war, and we pull out of Gaza to get their final hostages. So that's a non-starter. It remains a non-starter. As I wrote last night, Thomas Friedman is completely wrong when he said the feeling in Israel is better to get the hostages than destroy Hamas. Okay, there was a mother of one of the hostages was on TV before, and she basically said that let's end the war. We're not going to succeed anyway. Let's at least get back the hostages. But her view is in the extreme minority, and she has, a very personal stake here. Obviously, if God forbid it was one of my sons or daughters or something like that, I'd have a very, a very personal view, and I would do everything one can. The same way the Shalit family pushed for their deal. It was a terrible, terrible deal that we ended up giving up all those terrorists to release one soldier. But from their perspective, and I understand their perspective, their son is worth a million terrorists. But a nation can't make decisions in that way. Individuals can do whatever they can to do for their family, and I understand that. So, that's where we stand with the hostages. As to a larger war, if it hasn't happened until now, so far so good. However, at any given time, it could suddenly spin out of control. One attack of Hezbollah that is particularly harmful and succeeds in killing a whole large number, God forbid, of Israeli civilians, and then we retaliate in a large way, and that quickly escalates into something much more. Despite everyone's attempt to maintaining some sort of control, it's almost impossible to totally maintain control in a war situation. So I hope it doesn't. The Houthi situation could also involve Iran, get involved in more things. Again, it's unlikely. And the further we get in Gaza, the less and less incentive anyone has, because it'll be too late really to help Hamas. But we'll have to see. Abigail Leighton.
Got it. Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for doing this. It's so helpful to me. I'm living in Portland, Oregon, and I have a lot of contact with people on the left. And I am really heartbroken and frustrated about what to say to them. The optics from the war are very slanted. So there's all this trust in what people are seeing. There's a lot of trust in terms of putting Free Palestine signs on all the houses. It's really creepy and scary where I live. And I was working with Federation about the idea of trying to put together just a really concise page of Israeli history and maybe some facts about the war. I'm wondering if you've seen anything like that. I'm reading all the best things, trying to put it together, but it's a massive piece of work to just be able to say, rather than getting in a confrontation, just being able to do something clear like that.
I think somewhere going back about the first, second, or third week of the war, I put out something like that. I will look back, maybe repost it. I need to fill out tonight's update because I'm doing this right now and I'm going on I-24 at 10, so I don't have a lot of time to do the update tonight. So maybe I'll look to repost that again, among other things. It's not totally comprehensive, obviously. Look, the basic problem more than anything else is education, education, education. So we have one set of groups, people who are Palestinian by origin. There's nothing we're going to do about that. The same way that I have no problem, but I understand when Talebi, the congresswoman, is very much anti-Israel. I can totally, understand from her perspective. If I was a Palestinian, I wouldn't love us either. The problem is that everybody else on the progressive side these days sees things through a very difficult prism. We're white. Well, you know what? Half our country is not white, so to speak. And look at the soldiers who are dying. At least 10% of them at any given time are actually Ethiopian immigrants, not exactly white. We're rich. Well, some Jews are rich and some Jews are not rich. I mean, we're part of the establishment. Well, some Jews are part of the establishment and some are not. But that's how we're looked upon on so many different levels. And of course, the poor Palestinians had no ability in all the generations to ever make the right decisions. So of course, they made all the wrong decisions throughout history. A group that was originally not a nation and was not even an ethnic group, Palestinians, I'm not one of these people who say the Palestinians don't exist. The Palestinians do exist. They exist by the nature of their self-identity that was created because of their exile, so to speak, and that created a Palestinian identity, whether we like it or not. But before that, they had no historic identity. They were Syrian, or they were Lebanese, or they were Egyptian, or they were just part of the Ottoman Empire, and Arabs were living in this area. There was no individual identity. And the land that we we bought a lot of the land. It was all legal, upfront, honest, and a lot of it was uninhabited. And we're not a colony, and there's no place, we have no home country. But that's what we're looked upon. We're looked upon colonial, and colonial has become this, word to be used. Everything bad in the world was because of colonialism. I guess the United States shouldn't exist. Half the world shouldn't exist because of colonialism. Number two, we are the more powerful, more sometimes. Well, more powerful, weaker is always the one we have to identify with, and that's part of the problem with the left, is they went from who's right to who's weakest. But it doesn't help that we have this crazy right-wing government with some of the most insane people as ministers in this government. It certainly doesn't help us. And until this government changes, that won't change. And hopefully that'll happen sooner rather than later, although Netanyahu is going to do everything he can to stay in power. This man does not believe that he's replaceable, even though the whole country would like to replace him. So I'll try to put something in tonight. I have to go find it and see if I need to update it all. Gary.
Yes, thank you. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I've been trying to address the media left perspective, speaking with people, one-on-one, going through the history, and it's just ineffective. I'm trying now to come up with slogans. It's Hamas, not Palestinians, just one-line slogans that hit at it, because the education you're saying would be great, and I think that's important for the leaders of your society, whatever city, state, country. Those people have to know the history, but to educate the general public, I see most of them don't know, or just not involved. They don't care. They just live in a different world from us. I mean, we live, the Jewish community in this world, I've come to realize, it's just so not isolated, but different in our culture, in our values. We are very unique, and the rest of the world just doesn't understand us as a people. And I think we need a number of, one-liners that we can hit back and put out, but not, educating the general public in America on the history of Israel. That's
Well, I say two things. First of all, I have to agree on partly, as someone who spent basically my entire adult life in trying to find ways of teaching history, and I'm talking about American history for that matter. American history is other than Israeli history, is my forte and what I love. But I've spent most of my adult life trying to develop CD-ROMs, a website, all the things that I've done over the last 25 years or more to try to teach history. It's really difficult to teach people history. It's very difficult to get kids to be interested in history. On the other hand, I'm sorry, I'm not a TikTok person. My son won't allow us to have TikTok in the house for all sorts of reasons. I never even used TikTok, but the reality is everything shows that people who watch more TikTok are more anti-Israel. So there's something going on there, and that's the young people. And I don't know. I mean, yes, I'm in favor of slogans. I'm in favor, I think I said this the other time, I'm in favor of the American Jewish community stop sending money to Israel, though we need money, but start a $200, $300, $400 million campaign, an advertising campaign, not to come visit Israel, but it could be slogans, it could be history, it can be all the different elements, and not the quick hasbara of there are a couple of organizations that attack what the media says and correct them and all those other things, and that's all good. I'm not against that. But the reality is we need a much deeper, longer program of slogans, but of education. We can't give up on especially the young people. The young people are our biggest problem. You look at the statistics, people 65 and over are 95% in favor of Israel and 5% in favor of Hamas. People between the age of 18 and 24 are about 50-50 or 60-40 against us. So there's something going on there. A lot of it's the visuals they've seen, a lot of it's what they see on social media. And we need to find ways of fighting back in one way or another. We need to find the right allies. It's one thing you watch. I don't know if any of you saw. Mark Zuckerberg published a picture of himself and his two children and his wife lighting Hanukkah menorahs this year, and how important that was this year because his wife had converted. We need to find ways of getting people like that, not to become our propagandists, but working with us to figure out ways of influencing the public in our favor. Now, again, not short term. Whatever's going to happen in Gaza right now, where people are going to hate us for the number of civilians that are going to die, there's nothing, we're not going to be able to stop that, I'm afraid. And we'll fight until we make whatever decisions to stop fighting. Hopefully we win, but whatever other decisions. But I'm worried about the year after and the year after that. And I'm worried that the young generations who don't think we have a right to exist forget that that we should that we shouldn't bomb Gaza. No, I don't think we should exist at all. And somehow we need to find a way of reaching these people and educating them. I know it's a difficult challenge. It's an incredibly difficult challenge. Like I said, I've failed at it to some extent. I don't think my efforts in teaching American history, other than the few classes that I taught in person, which I think I did a reasonable job of. But beyond that, I don't think I influenced all that many people. All the CD-ROMs and all my website and everything else, and I get tens of thousands of visitors a week to my website. But it's just like everything else, another piece of information they pick up along the way. But we need to find a way of doing that, because if we don't, I don't know where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years, even assuming everything here works out well. And slogans are important too, because Americans like slogans, campaign slogans and everything else. Gary, I don't know if it's the same Gary or not. Gary, unmute yourself. Gary, you're muted. Okay.
Praise Lord by hand.
Okay. Ian, and then Joseph.
Yeah, hi Mark. Thanks for the call. I just want to preface it by saying I'm visiting Cyprus at the moment. I visit here quite frequently. There's a very large and growing group of Israeli expatriates here, made up of a combination of retirees and young families that have decided to leave Israel and raise their kids abroad. And there's a number of reasons they choose Cyprus, and for them, Ainli Eretz Acheret, lo tofes, it just doesn't apply. And the question I really have, or asking you for a comment, would be along the lines of, this struggle has been going on for 75 years, with huge amounts of people dying and painful losses on every side. I've lost friends, too many young friends in Israel. And if Israel cannot guarantee moving forward through some kind of political solution the safety of people living in Israel, why on earth do you think young families or people who can would choose to remain there if they could rather leave and go abroad?
Okay, so clearly, the people have been leaving Israel since the beginning. We have people who after the Holocaust came to Israel, decided it was too tough, and moved to the United States. Going, all the way back then, we had waves of immigrants leaving Israel in the early 60s. Some of the earliest people who were, Israeli Americans go back to that period of time, and all the way through, you've had Israelis leaving the country. You have a lot of people who leave the country, end up going for a year or two, and end up staying for 20 years. We did almost that. It wasn't quite, but we left for 6 months and we're gone for almost 20 years, but we've been back already for 12. So you've had that throughout our history. it's a modern world, you can move about all you want. But ultimately, the ultimate answer to your question is, it seems, as best as we can see, that the original reason for Zionism still stands today. You know, anti-Semitism in the world didn't disappear. I thought it might have. To be honest with you, I've been surprised, as someone who's, like I said, studied American history in depth and American Jewish history quite a bit. I've been surprised by the depth of American anti-Semitism that has developed post, to some extent, the early Donald Trump period, and now on the left. And I've been surprised. It's more than I would have expected, but it's now quite clear that it's quite deep. And of course, we've seen it in other parts of the world as well. You know, we were in the period after the Holocaust, we lived in a certain bubble because anti-Semitism became something that you couldn't dare speak, because look what it led to. But all that generation is gone, and suddenly it's okay to be anti-Semitic to a greater or lesser extent. So ultimately, that's the ultimate reason. The reason is that there is no other place for Jews where despite the fact that we can't guarantee 100% of 100% our safety, we still have an army and an air force and everything else that spends a lot of time and effort trying to do that, and it's mostly effective. Look, what happened on the Gaza border will never happen again. Will never happen again. That will never happen again. We will never, something else might happen. Don't get me wrong. There are other things that could happen. We still have to worry about an Iranian nuclear bomb, and another tremendous mistake of Netanyahu and Trump, but we'll leave that part aside. But we still have to worry about all sorts of other things. But what happened on the Gaza border will never happen again. We will never not have large numbers of troops guarding every one of our borders. It's going to cost a lot of money over a period of time, and it's going to change the way things are set up. We have to make the right political decisions going forward. But ultimately, there is no other place in the world where Jews can defend themselves. And I'd rather take the losses, risk my children or grandchildren, or whatever, to take those losses, than live in a place where I have nothing to defend myself, other than the will of some politicians that can and cannot be good or bad. And Jewish history is unfortunately full of bad examples. That would be my short answer. Joseph? Joseph, you there? Okay. Do we have anyone else? Ian.
Is that me who was talking earlier? You're
Okay.
referring to?
Someone
Sorry, I still have my hand up.
Oh, I see. Okay, never mind. Okay. Okay. Beth. We can't hear you. Speak closer to the mic. Beth, we still can't hear you. Beth?
Okay. So you talked about TikTok being like where all this anti-Semitic information is being spewed. Well, why is Israel or like big organizations, like how do we get them involved, like the ADL or JNF? How do we get big organizations that could reach multitudes of people in their marketing or however they would do it to get involved, instead of just like going with blinders, like they're deaf and whatever, and ignoring this fact? Like, I feel like it's totally being ignored.
Okay, I don't know if it's being ignored, but it's not being fought on it's not being fought on an even basis. It's not being fought like an all-out war, which it is. JNF.
I mean, I don't mean ignored.
No, but I mean in terms of an information war, an education war, all those sort of things. JNF, there's raising money for their Israel programs. That's how everyone makes money in that organization. I can go through all these organizations. They're all doing what they know how to do. The ADL is fighting anti-Semitism up to a certain level, but they're responsive more than anything else. I'm telling you, it requires changing of priorities and spending not a $2 million budget or a $5 million budget. It requires a $200 million budget or a $500 million budget. It requires a budget of a major Fortune 500, what they spend on marketing. That's what, that's what's required, and it requires the type, sort of people with some educators together with them to do it. People who know what they're
But why-
doing. Influence.
Why don't,
God, Beth?
so, okay, so I'm thinking about all these people that are pulling money from these, like the University of Pennsylvania, MIT, yada, yada, hundreds of millions of dollars there. Like, how do we get them to, instead of donating money to these schools, which now they're saying they're pulling, to use that money but then you have to think about who is going to do it for them. Like where that money, like there is that money that's not going to the schools right now. I mean, if you could grab it, great. Otherwise, it's going to go back to the schools eventually.
I have no doubt someone needs to come forth and create an organization, and not a duplicate. I don't know, either create a new organization or redirect an existing organization that this is what their goal is, and have big plans and not little plans, and not try to make little changes, but try to make big changes. I don't know. I mean, I tried years ago. This goes all the way back to the time I was active in the 70s. I think I mentioned this once before. I would argue that Israel was getting about $2 billion a year from the United States, and the Israeli government was spending about $1 million a year on hasbara, on information. I said, wait a second, $2 billion, any normal corporation spends at least 5% on marketing. Some do 10%, but 5% is like the baseline of what any company spends on marketing. So Israel should be spending $100 million back then. And if we've been spending $100 million a year for the last 40 years, things might have been different. But I don't want to go into all the problems of the Israeli government. Let's put it that way. It's beyond the Israeli government's ability to do it then, and it's beyond the Israeli government's ability to do it now. They would probably put some political hack who doesn't know what he's doing in charge of it in any case. So not a good idea. In this case, it has to be someone, in my opinion, from the American or British jury who has real experience in doing these things, who steps forward and says, I'm going to take this on and I'm willing to do it, etc. I don't know of such a person, quite honestly. If anyone does, I'd be happy to talk to them. It needs to be done, in my opinion, and it's a medium to long-term project. But if we don't start now, it'll never happen. Paul.
Yeah, so there was talk about Israel using Mediterranean water to flood the tunnels, and but it looks like it's just been all talk now. So what's the situation with that? Are the Israelis afraid that they will kill the hostages as well as the Hamas? I mean, what's the story?
Okay, I'll be honest with you, they're not talking about it. So there's two possibilities why they're not talking about it. A, it didn't work. Although originally they said it did work to some extent, or B, like you said, or it is working, but only in specific areas. Don't forget, it has to be close enough. It has to be close enough to the water to make it feasible to do. You can't really pump it that far, I don't think. And three, there is the problem of the hostages. Those are the three factors. I don't know what's happening when it comes to that. I'm hoping some of it's being done. Look, this is a war. Obviously, telling your opponents exactly what you're doing is always not a good idea. So it's okay that we don't know everything. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
It says one other besides Paul, but it doesn't say who it is. So one other, whoever you are.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Why has nobody at all suggested the idea of some temporary reallocation on Israeli territory through Kerem Shalom, supervised, say, by the Red Cross? Because it would take out the problem of hiding behind the general population in Gaza, and it would show goodwill. It would be morally the right thing to do, and it would be strategically and tactically a clever thing to do. It would show that Israel is caring, and it's the one thing that Israel has control over, which is Israeli territory.
I agree 100%. I think it's an excellent idea to do it. I think I mentioned it a long time ago. I can see where politically there'd be issues letting them come back into the state of Israel. Then what happens afterwards? How do you get them to move out afterwards? I can see it's complicated. Look, one of the problems in this war, in my opinion, is however well it is or is not being fought militarily, there's no one sitting around the table who's looking at it from a political strategic standpoint or, public relations standpoint. Once upon a time, an Israeli government and a war government would have a foreign minister who was capable and knowledgeable and had those things in mind. I look back, I think of Abba Eban, but there are a few others in Israeli history who'd be sitting around the table. Now, his advice wouldn't always be listened to, but he had certain advice along the way. And when military decisions were being made, also was concerned about other things, other aspects of it. It's very nice that Gantz and Eisenkot joined the war cabinet. And they're certainly more capable, in my opinion, than the other members of the war cabinet, being Netanyahu and Gantz and Gallant, excuse me. However, both Gantz and Eisenkot are military men. That's what their experience is. One is a Golani soldier, and one's a paratrooper. Those were their experiences in life, and they were good soldiers, and they may have been good chief of staffs. But they don't bring the other aspect into the decision making, and that's not part of the decision making, I'm afraid. Netanyahu thinks he brings some of it, but he doesn't really, because he doesn't think strategically really very far ever. He mostly strategically thinks about politics and not these sort of matters. But yeah, I think it would be a great idea. Look, I think we should be doing more. The Gazans that are still in northern Gaza, there are still Gazans in northern Gaza. I don't understand why we haven't created a field hospital for them. I don't get it. Why have we not done that? Now, politically, I'm sure it would be, Itamar Ben-Gvir would threaten to leave the government if why are we spending resources on Gazans? But that's what we should do. What's our responsibility in terms of, the rules of law, the rules of war say that once we've conquered civilian population, we are responsible for their safety and health. We're not.
But there's a
doing that.
military advantage to doing it as well, because they clear out of the way.
Well, that's for sure. I agree 100%. But
Why is nobody talking about it in Israel then?
because probably problem number one is the issue of once they come into Israel, how do we get them back to Gaza afterwards? That's problem. I'm just giving I don't agree, but that would be the biggest problem. B, there would be the political problem within this government. Remember, this government is standing thanks to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, both, far right. Both would oppose this idea and would basically threaten to leave the government, in which case the Netanyahu government would fall. And there might be another government without elections, but Netanyahu would not remain prime minister. And of course, Netanyahu's, ultimate goal in everything is to remain prime minister forever and ever and ever. And that would seem to be his goal. So that's a real problem. And it doesn't allow for innovative thinking. Look, one of the things we've certainly not seen is any out-of-the-box thinking. Not militarily, not politically. Nothing has taken place that's been out of the box and say, gee whiz, isn't that a great idea? Look what they managed to do. We've seen that neither in the military, nor in the political, and certainly not in the strategic or in like the idea that you presented as a solution.
But could pressurize Egypt into matching the offer as well. So it could be 50% of the, what you needed to do.
Egypt under no circumstances doesn't want any Palestinians. They, have successfully managed, the Palestinians, they fought in the ISIS/Palestinians in the Sinai Desert for 5 years, and they succeeded, and they actually won that war. And finally, tourism has returned to Sinai, which is a big income driver for Egypt. They're now losing the Suez Canal, which can't last for long for them. But so Egypt does not want any more Palestinian territory.
But we could do it. Israel has
we could do it again. But it would require some major effort. Creating an area that you fence off in time, totally control a lot of little things that might be very problematic. But I think it's a great idea. I just don't think it'll ever happen. Okay. Anybody else? Yes. Rabbi Eli, come on.
It's Ellie, Mark.
Okay.
I have to go, so I want to thank you. I look forward to our next meeting.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I'll be doing it every
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. I'll be doing it every 2 weeks. So we will do it again in 2 weeks. I fear that we will still be at war in 2 weeks, much to our sadness. So everybody, thank you all, and see you all in 2 weeks. And there'll be a short update tonight. So take care, everybody.